Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our chapter-by-chapter coverage of Game of Thrones. This week we're talking about Eddard number 7. We get to start our long-running hype train for Clegane Bowl. This is the first time we see them go at it. And, in about 7 or 8 years' time... Oh, no, wait, that book's not even out yet. In 20 to 30 years' time, we will hit the chapter where they finally fight for their rematch.
My God. I didn't realize this was so early on. Planting the seeds for this is so early in the story. Like, I knew that the Mountain was around, but actually, I don't know if I remember him in this first book and first season.
Yeah, well, in the show, they recast him a few times.
Yeah.
So the Mountain we picture, like the zombie Mountain we picture, is a totally different looking dude. Mm-hmm. But yes, I think the best feuds and rivalries need to fester. So you need to set him up early and then let him bake.
It's true.
On the back burner for 2 or 3 decades.
For a long, long time.
So what happened in this chapter, Eddard number 7, Maggie?
Let me tell you, first of all, Eddard has had the most chapters of everybody so far, so this is pretty fun to be in number 7. Also, you told me earlier, this is our 31st Game of Thrones episode.
It is.
I kept saying, we've been doing this for, I don't know, a couple dozen, I don't know how long we do this. 31 weeks, in fact, so welcome. If you have been here the whole time, congratulations, you made it 31 weeks, and there are a lot more to go.
The whole time would be 4 years.
Wow.
This is episode 382.
You know what that means, Cam, is pretty close. Our Game of Thrones baby will be done developing, will be fully born. That's 36 weeks, so we're getting there.
Just in time to see Ned beheaded.
Perfect. Welcome to the world, baby.
We can have
Eddard.
a christening / funeral.
Oh, God. Okay, anyway, that was a weird analogy we just went down. Okay, sure. So this is a Game of Thrones Eddard number 7. Quick spoiler reminder for everything, for all the books and the show. Okay, so it is day 2 of the Hand's tourney. Remember, last we were with Sansa, she had seen day 1. So now we're switching over to Ned. It's his perspective. So it's the morning of, and Ned is looking down, very sadly, at the body of the knight who was killed by the Mountain the day before. Ned is feeling very bitter because this kid was killed for no reason. Also, Ned wanted to talk to this guy because he had known Jon Arryn. Suspicious. And so then that's suspicious. That's weird. That's what this whole chapter is that suspicious. That's weird. Had that kid in there. And so
By the way, we just did the Spider-Man discussion over on Patreon.
Yeah, that's where that's coming from.
If you enjoyed that little reference.
Okay, so Ned goes over to talk to King Robert, and Ned and Sir Barristan Selmy basically get Robert. They convince him not to fight in the melee that day. They're like, "Hey, you're the king. Who's gonna actually hit you? They're gonna let you win." And Robert's like, "Well, I can't have that," and so he decides not to fight. And then Robert and Ned just have like a good friendship moment chat, and Ned starts to feel hopeful. Poor sweet baby, but he starts to feel hopeful. And so then the tourney begins again, and a few things happen of note. 1, the Hound jousts against Jaime Lannister and wins. And then 2, Sir Gregor fights Sir Loras Tyrell. Sir Gregor is, of course, the Mountain. He fights Loras Tyrell, who's the Knight of the Flowers. Loras wins, and the Mountain is so furious because his horse had been like, Loras's mare was in heat, and the Mountain's stallion was like, "Hey, I want some of that." And so he just was distracted, and it like ruined it for him. And so he's so mad that he beheads his horse, and then he's gonna go kill Loras, but then Robert ends up stopping it.
The Hound steps in.
Yes, the Hound steps in, right, and then Robert stops it, so it nothing happens, but it's a tense moment. And so then the tourney goes on the rest of the day, and then they have a feast. Quick side note, Arya's dancing lessons are going well by her account, so that's good to know. But then Ned goes back to his chambers, and he's like getting ready to go to bed. And then a cloaked, nameless man comes to see him, and Ned's like, "Sure, let him in."
Strider.
No, it's... Oh. What if it was, though? It's
what
not.
If the horse the Mountain killed was Bill the Pony?
Bill the Pony, no! Poor Bill, coming all this way from the Mines of Moria just to be beheaded by the Mountain.
The Mountain that rides.
Oh, God. Yeah, no, it's not that. This hooded man is Varys. And so Varys comes to talk to Ned, and he's like, "Hey, there was a plot to kill King Robert." And Ned's like, "Excuse me?" And he says, "Yeah, remember how Cersei said, 'Oh no, Robert, please don't fight in the melee tomorrow,' that they were trying to get him to fight so that he could die in the confusion." And Ned's like, we got to do something about this. And Varys is like, we sure do. We can't tell Robert just yet. It's too dangerous to tell him, but we should work together and make sure that we are on the same page here. And Ned's like, Roger, good idea. And then he starts asking Varys other questions about Jon Arryn. Oh, while you're here, what kind of poison was it? Etc., etc. And he finally ends up asking, why did the Lannisters kill Jon Arryn when they decided to kill him? Like, he was here for 14 years. Why then? And Varys just says it's because he was asking questions. And that's the end of the chapter. This one was fun and so frustrating to read.
Get
but
into
fun.
that.
Yeah, so I was finding myself, every time we read Ned, I'm frustrated because in my head, I'm like, it's so obvious. Everything is right in front of you, Ned. Why aren't you paying attention?
Have you seen the show?
Yeah, don't you know how this ends? Like, and every time I try to counter that and balance it with, okay, this is not fair because I know what happens. I know what's going on behind the scenes with these other characters. Like, it's totally not fair for me to, like, try to think that Ned should just immediately know everything that's going on. But I think this is the most frustrated I've been with him here. But I think I understand why he's being the way he is. But first, let's talk about the way that he in fact is. I just think he is so blind to so much in this chapter. We see lots of examples of this. One, when he's looking at that dead knight, it says that that he was slain by a Lannister bannerman before Ned could speak to him. Could that be happenstance? And I just wrote, of course not, Ned. Of course it's not happenstance. Like, you've got to, like, connect the dots here.
He's trying. He's getting there.
He is.
He's a slow learner.
There are points when he makes note in this chapter both of Lannister and Baratheon genetic tendencies. He's looking at the squires who work for King Robert, who are Lannisters. They both have, like, blonde hair and green eyes, like, hello. And then he's also thinking about, well, there was that Renly guy. He looks a lot like Robert. But what does he have to do with this? So he's thinking about that. He also thinks that the Robert personality that he's getting today is going to stay the same. He's like, oh, well, this guy, this is the Robert I knew. He's going to believe me when I tell him all about Jon Arryn. So that's going to be great. So he's thinking about that. The most shocking thing was that he lets this unnamed hooded man into his room. Not only does he, like, without hesitation say, bring him in, he then, like, Varys, and he doesn't know it's Varys, says, like, hey, we need to talk alone. And Ned's like, sure, hey, Jory or whoever there is guarding him, like, please leave us, we'll be fine. Like, he doesn't even hesitate. I mean, the narration...
Have you seen the size of his sword?
Yeah, but he's
fine.
He's not prepared for this. And, like, the narration even, like, calls him out. It says curiosity was stronger than caution. And when he asks Varys, like, hey, like, what happened to Jon Arryn? He's been asking Varys 1,000 questions. And he says, why did they kill Arryn when they did? And Varys says, because he was asking questions. And so even the narration is calling Ned out. And he also, like, is very... earlier on when he first met Varys, it was clear that Ned didn't like Varys. He didn't trust him. He seems weird. He seems skeevy. The eunuch thing, I think, is freaking him out a little bit. And here we see him see Varys in a new light, and that's really interesting. But he doesn't at all seem to question Varys's motivations. Like, at first he says, hey, why didn't you tell me any of this before the tournament? And Varys gives him a very, like, prepared answer, like, well, if I had told you, you would have told Robert, and then it would have been bad, blah, blah, blah. And Ned just kind of goes, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, he doesn't at all consider maybe Varys is playing me. Maybe Varys is pretending to be on my side. Maybe he's playing another game. He just doesn't recognize any of this stuff, and it's frustrating to watch.
I think Ned has a different temperament than everyone else in the Capitol, where I think he tries to take people at face value with the grain of salt that can change from day to day. I thought his recognition of this is the Robert that I was friends with was the first glimmer of hope he's gotten since he came to the Capitol.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's not him being naive.
No, it's not. It is more complicated than that. Before I get into that, not only is, like, Ned being a little bit oblivious to things in the narration, but there's some language choices that are made here that I think also help us understand what's going on in Ned's head. I noticed a lot, especially in the scene when the Mountain and Sir Loras are jousting. There's a lot of uses of the word, like, suddenly, or things are happening really quickly. We get that suddenly it began. Suddenly Loras Tyrell was on him. In an eye blink, the Mountain was falling. The Mountain killed the horse with a single blow. Cheers turned to shrieks and a heartbeat. It all happened so fast. Robert said something, and quickly as that, it was over. Like, things are happening really, really fast. And I thought, well, an easiest way to interpret that is things seem to happen really suddenly in Ned's point of view. Like Ned doesn't see a lot of things coming. We see things coming. We see seeds being planted early on, but Ned doesn't see them coming. And what first, before I move on, what do you think about that?
This is not the read I get on Ned at all. I'm interested by it, but I think Ned is an experienced soldier who made it through overthrowing a Targaryen regime, and now he's been a lord for a long time with pretty happy subjects who aren't trying to kill him, and he's a very attentive father to 1,000 kids at different ages. And we see the way he balances Arya and Sansa in this chapter. We see when he talks to Robert that Ned cares about his family and is very up on what they're doing right now, and Robert is just going on this screed about how much he hates his wife, her family, how much he hates his son, how much he doesn't care about his other kids. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I think Ned is much. I mean, maybe Robert. It's sort of an easy comparison, but he's much quicker than Robert is, and I think he's trying in this like crash course of how to live and survive and make friends in King's Landing. I think he's putting in the work to try to get to Littlefinger Varys level. We know he won't get there in time, but I think he's making progress.
Yeah, I see what you mean. He is trying, and I wanna I think hold on to that part that he's trying, because I think the easiest way to interpret what I'm seeing as this blindness, this obliviousness, this almost naivete that Ned has, the easiest way to interpret that is he's stubborn and of the North and won't change in his ways. There's even a fun little thing where Barristan Selmy, this older knight of the Kingsguard, he says out loud after the stuff with Loras and his horse, he says, "There's small honor in tricks," the old man said stiffly. And so I think you could very easily extend that to Ned and say, oh, Ned is also an old man who is stiff and stubborn and won't change. But I think that's not very helpful, because I think if you want to look at it more and like agree that he is in fact trying, I think what's happening is that he's trying to seize control, because he is very quickly losing control over everything in his life. We've seen that already. He says, like, how can I, guide the king when I can't even have control over my own household or something? But in this chapter, we see that he can't control what's going on with Arya, because he sees that Arya says that her dancing lessons have been going well, but Ned's like, he's not really teaching you how to use a sword. He's teaching you how to stand on one foot, and you have a lot of bruises. But he he says to himself that he knows he can't change her mind. Arya's stubborn. He can't convince her not to do these dancing lessons. So he's like stuck there. He can't stop the mountain from killing Sir Loras. Sansa even says to Ned, like, don't let it happen, Dad, or Father, And at one point, Ned, like, yells for it to stop, and it doesn't. It's only Robert who's able to do it. He can't talk to the people he wants to talk to about Jon Arryn. They keep dying or disappearing or not responding to his letters. Varys tells him that he's being watched by the Queen. He can't figure out the Robert's bastard situation. He can't figure that out. But so what he does when he does have a positive effect on something, which is getting Robert not to participate in the tourney and sort of like getting his old friend back, when he's able to do that, he clings onto that naturally. So he's like, that's why he feels hopeful, because of course he does, because he can't control anything around him. So this one time he is able to positively have an effect on something, he's like, okay, cool, I'm starting to feel more grounded and more centered. And so I think the same thing is happening when Varys comes in, and he's like, oh, finally, a confidant, somebody I can plot and scheme with, and somebody who can help me understand what's happening here. So it's not just that he's stubborn and old and stupid. It's like he's just trying to get control, and this is the best way he can.
I think he's trying to adapt, which is incredibly difficult, because his instinct is to revert to principle, and the instinct of everyone else here is self-interest, which is basically what Varys kicks open the door to tell him.
Yeah.
But I think the longer this free fall goes of realizing that the world and life is not like he wanted it to be, or even, honestly, like it is in the North, it's not just a perspective thing. It's a very different set of people and principles up north.
Yeah, he even says that. He says this whole little thing in his head where he wishes he was back north where it was simpler.
Right. And it is simpler up there. Like, that's not just him being naive. That's just him being thrown into a totally different pond.
It's just the truth, yeah.
So I think it's him trying to change the phrasing of the question. It's kind of a mission creep thing. I don't think it's him losing control. I think it's as he gathers more information and hoovers up more clues, I think it's him realizing he never had control and he was looking at things the wrong way before. But I do think we're at that recalibration stage where it's not just him being smacked in the head. I think, again, he's trying to learn and change the way he's viewing things, which is why he's admitting a stranger into his apartment at night. Because, like I said, he's a warrior. He's totally capable in combat. He's experienced, and most of the other guys, I mean, unless they're on the Kingsguard, and half of those are fucking legacy, you know, my dad went to Yale, so I get into Yale appointments. I would bet on Ned in a duel over most of the people in King's Landing. I think he can hold his own, and when he sees plump little Varys walk in, he's fine.
Sure.
Like, I think that's him resting on the things he is confident in. I can take whoever this is in a fight, and if they try to kill me, I'll just, like, he's already savvy to the idea of people being poisoned. So the only thing that's going to nuke him in this conversation is someone pulling a sword on him. And I think he's confident he can take him there.
Sure, yeah. And when he hasn't been able to ask any of the people that he wants to ask about Jon Arryn's death, he finally has somebody who knows stuff in front of him. So he's like, Varys, please tell me. I need to know something.
And he doesn't immediately confide in Varys. He asks him a couple guarded questions.
And he doesn't mention, like, the bastards or anything. He doesn't do any of that.
He doesn't show his hand. He's not stupid here. He's trying to play the game, and I think he's playing catch up. He's realizing that he's swimming without a paddle because whatever that phrase is, because he thought he was going to be helping a capable Robert, not trying to rule the kingdom while Robert tried to sabotage it the whole time.
Yeah. And also trying to solve a murder and also trying to prevent another one and all that.
I thought of Ned as being much more capable in this chapter than he has been lately. But I think there's this... the phrase that kept popping up in my notes was foundationally destructive. I think so much of what happens in this chapter is dispiriting and discouraging and really bothersome on like a foundational principle level, not just for Ned, but for all these characters who are sort of like Ned if you squint at him, like Barristan Selmy, like the good version of King Robert. So that's maybe what I want to speak to more in the chapter. But I'm glad you sort of biased your recap because I think that's interesting. I like this tension between the two Neds we're playing with.
Great. By the way, I think earlier I said Renly. I meant Gendry. I keep doing that. I keep calling Gendry Renly.
Okay.
And I know who Renly is. I just keep accidentally calling Gendry. Anyway, so if I said that earlier, I meant Gendry. Anyway, continue.
The thing that really spoke to me, and I think gave me this much more positive impression of Ned, was right at the beginning there, when we open on this shot of the knight, or squire, I guess, who was killed by the mountain in the previous day of the tourney.
He had been very recently named a knight.
Yeah,
so,
and he was previously the squire to Jon Arryn. And we find out at the end of the chapter that he was killed just in case Ned wanted to talk to him, so he couldn't tell him anything useful. But those clues were planted in the first paragraph of the chapter.
Right.
To the point that, I mean, obviously I've read the books, but you could get it from the first paragraph.
Of course, yeah.
And I thought that made it feel like Ned was moving into his Batman era, scratching his chin, where I felt that murkiness, that conspiracism that pulled me back to the earlier Ned chapters when he was finding out that there was a problem, when he and Catelyn were, all the skullduggery with the Jon Arryn letter and burning the letter and secret information and codes, and he knows how to speak this language a little bit. So I thought starting there in the first paragraph with these sort of bitter echoes of that early conspiracism, that signaled to me that Ned was on his game here. But it was also that he's a reflective and emotional guy. And I think taking a moment to linger on, man, this kid died in the tourney for nothing, and that's supposed to be for me, and when they send something to his mother, it's going to be in my name that the kid died for nothing. That brought me back to the previous conversation between Ned and Robert, where they initially talk about Dany when they're by the river. That beautiful transition in the show over to Dany when they're like plotting, oh, should we kill her or no?
Yeah.
And it reminded me of Dany's wedding. It was another like bitter echo here, where during her wedding, a bunch of people died needlessly because Dothraki just fight and kill each other and
that's just part of the celebration.
Mount each other during the... Yeah. And it was like that death and needless suffering, that like waste of human life, I thought that kind of rolled all of this into one. That you get these echoes of the early conspiracism and the Dothraki wedding. It's these echoes full of schemers and a total waste of human life.
Sure. And the people who it's supposed to be for don't care about or want the thing to happen.
Right.
Danny doesn't want to get married or have this scary wedding, and Ned doesn't want this tournament to happen.
It's fruitless. It's just a waste. It is, like I said before, it's incredibly dispiriting, and just kind of serving up those metaphors and callbacks on a platter, it throws you into sort of an existential freefall. And when you compound those bitter echoes like that for someone like Ned, it's suffocating.
Yeah. Well, and both of those people, to think about what I was talking about earlier, Ned and Danny both are like lacking control and agency in these situations. They can't control any of it. They don't get a say in any of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that makes total sense. So then you see them both try to regain control going forward.
Sure.
Really interesting.
And I think there's a certain malaise that has fallen over most of these Ned-coded characters, like Robert, like Barristan Selmy. Robert is being quite melancholic compared to how boisterous he was being in the last chapter.
Yeah.
He gives himself this sort of knowing nickname of like, shit, I wish I could just stop being king and run away and do my own thing and, sleep with women and kill people with my hammer and the stuff I enjoy. And he gives himself this nickname of the sellsword king and says, oh, the singers would love me. Him being that melancholic and giving himself a nickname, we have never seen Robert Baratheon zoom out like that before.
That's
or
true.
Be that thoughtful. For me, it really distilled this idea that I was seeing in Ned of putting together these callbacks and echoes and how discouraging those bitter echoes could be. Because for Robert, Ned even observes this in his, we're tied in on his POV here, he talks about Robert remembering and how that can haunt him and lock him into bad decisions. This like skill and curse of remembering. It reminded me of The Sopranos with that, when Tony almost kills Paulie, that episode Remember When.
Yeah.
When he says, remember when is the lowest form of conversation. But for someone like Robert, who's a king, it's the weight of history and legacy on his shoulders. And we've seen how that weight over the years of his reign has crushed the good and healthy part of his spirit. So it's this barrage of echoes over and over through all of these different characters, these multiple cascading, poisonous, lingering echoes, to the point that Ned uses the phrase wheels within wheels within wheels, which felt like a particularly, like the Frank Herbert phrase that I talked about during our Dune episodes was feints within feints within feints. Yep. And I feel like this is very clearly a riff on that phrase. But I like the shift in terms, because the wheel thing speaks to cogs in a machine, which in the metaphor is people. And so much of this work is just characterization. It's just emotion. It's people talking about people. Yes, there are some jousting and some stabbings and beheadings in this chapter, but the really devastating shit is just about people and emotions.
Sure.
It's about miserable truths, ideas, these foundationally destructive ideas. And we talked about Stannis last time we talked about Ned. And I was asking that question based on my favorite Stannis quote, will he bend or break, right? When people are too principled, they don't bend, they just break. Ned keeps getting all of these crushing revelations and new ways of viewing the world. I'm sort of past the question of will Ned bend or break because I know how the story ends. But if you apply it to the information that he gets at the very end of the chapter, do you think Ned is more likely to trust Varys and invest in that possible plan, or to lean on Robert and nostalgia and confess to Robert? Just given this chapter, ignoring what you know about what happens next, where do you think his head is right now?
I think Ned is going to really cautiously lean on Robert here. I think after all of his interactions with Robert that he's had in this chapter, he's feeling pretty hopeful about their relationship and what he, the way that Robert's going to react to things. But I also think that if he believed or trusted anything Varys said in this chapter, it's that you're his only friend. You're Robert's only friend. You're the only person he can trust. And so I think he's going to really lean on that going forward. I mean, he also knows from his interaction or from his conversation with Varys that he can't fully tell Robert everything. He has to tell him things at the right time. But I think he's going to pretty heavily rely on and hope for the Robert that he knew being around here. I think that's what he's going to focus on.
And I think Robert gives him reason to trust in that possibility, that there is a good kernel of Robert that he could appeal to. The way he apologizes for Ned having to kill the direwolf and confesses that he knows Sansa was in the right, or that at least Joffrey was in the wrong.
Yeah.
I think there is something clear-headed and encouraging about that.
Yeah.
If Robert didn't die, if Ned didn't die, if you take out all the bad shit that's about to happen in the story, I think there's a world in which Ned does learn quick enough. If he got to continue on this trajectory without everything else, all these other dominoes falling, I think he could have survived here.
Yeah,
Maybe. Like,
I
I'm
know.
torn between this. There's sort of a hopelessness. I talked about this malaise, this nihilism in this chapter. I found that discouraging, but I also found it sort of fascinating because it was all about underlying philosophies. It was all about these rumbling engines beneath the words and ideas that people presented. And I was so taken, more than anything in this chapter, by what Varys sort of served up on a platter to Ned here. This like moral dichotomy. I wrote down the full quote so we can play with it properly.
Okay.
His claim is that the Red Keep shelters two sorts of people: those who are loyal to the realm and those who are loyal only to themselves. So the Red Keep shelters two sorts of people: those who are loyal to them. My fuck up.
You got it.
Those who are loyal to the realm and those who are loyal only to themselves. So my question is, and I'm not going in the direction you think I am here,
Okay.
with everything we've seen and learned over the last 31 weeks and chapters we've been talking about this book, do you think Varys is being too idealistic and positive here? Is he being too hopeful here? Because all the time that we've spent at King's Landing, I don't think there's anyone who's loyal to the realm.
Well, right. I have two things. Number one, I know from later on in this series that Varys often says that his only loyalty is to the realm. He's not on any one side. He's just trying to help the realm out. I mean, how much do we believe that? I don't know. So there is that complication. Maybe that's just him trying to, I don't know, justify his own morality system. But even more so, my other thing is I can't figure out what Varys' angle is here. Like, knowing how much of a sneak and a spider he is, but also not quite remembering what the result, like what the point of this interaction is, I can't figure out what he's doing. Like, I don't think he's just coming in and trying to genuinely help Ned. I don't think it's even as simple as, I just want to make sure the king doesn't get killed. But I also don't think I know he's not working for the Lannisters and trying to trick Ned into working with him. So I can't figure out what he's doing here. I have no idea.
It's really tricky. And if you give me a little runway here, I think I know what the point of this is.
Okay.
And I think part of it is to get us totally stuck in that quagmire.
Quagmire.
I caught it,
we're
but
British now.
I'll still punish myself for it. Basically, I think practically there's no way to fully separate any of these major players from self-interest, even if they wanted to.
Okay, sure. I mean, there's no way to separate any human from self-interest. Like, that's always going to be a factor.
As the one governing principle.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think there's anyone who in King's Landing who could truly be an altruistic leader.
Sure, yeah.
The only one in the whole book is maybe Jon.
Right.
And even he has to go through a lot of stuff to get there.
Yeah.
And reach that enlightenment. But we've said in the past Jon chapters, we've talked about hope. And I think that's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel in Game of Thrones. We talk about how dark, we talk about how bleak and realistic and nihilistic this series is. But the last Jon chapter was all about hope and second chances and Sam Tarly. And I still believe in all that. But the problem, when you get to King's Landing and you meet with the king and the rulers, is that individual hope in people scalable? Can that work on a governmental level? And I think this is George R. R. Martin sort of forcing us to cosplay leadership. I think he's almost recreating the quagmires, the contradictions of leadership for us, and making us grapple with the impossibility of governance on this scale. And in a way, he's explaining Robert and his sort of apathy and him having lost the lust for life here. He's explaining what happened to Robert by making it happen to Ned. Because Ned is becoming disenchanted and disillusioned in a way that I imagine Robert had to go through alone in a viper pit full of Lannisters.
That's true.
20 years ago.
And Robert even says to Ned, like, I wish we could have done this together and then you had been king and then I could have not. But we both know that wouldn't have worked. Ned also could not be a good king.
And that's the thing, because based on the rest of this chapter, I was trying to zoom out and look at everyone else, because this is a chapter about people and every person is an argument in a different direction. based on the rest of this chapter, I think it really does seem impossible for any of these people to look beyond themselves. We see Sansa and Arya, even though they've got their own interests, and that's fine. There's a self-absorption in there's tunnel vision commitment to their individual hobbies or interests.
I mean, they're also children, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Right, but they're also characters that we're deep in the POV of, and I think there's something valuable there.
Sure.
The Clegane feuds, there's a single-minded self-interest there over decades. Characters like Renly and Littlefinger betting on these basically fighting pits where people die uselessly, and they're throwing money and quips around. That speaks to a nihilism and self-interest. And, I wish this other guy was here because I would have won even more money on that kid being murdered. There's an endless web of self-serving schemes and power grabs and vultures and just scrap it for parts and make money off the survivors. Like, there is nothing aspirational or anything that would be conducive to a good leader in these people. And even when Robert says, oh shit, it should have been you or Jon Arryn, Ned, it should have been one of you two guys who was king. We know that he's wrong. Yeah. We know that both of these guys are immediately outfoxed and killed. They are the gazelle at the watering hole in King's Landing. They're both nuked.
Right.
And I think this is the quagmire, if I can explicate what that is instead of just gesture at this contradiction. I think it's that you need a player on the throne. You need a survivor who knows how to play and win the game. But that's the problem, because they need to be able to win and play the game while also resisting all of those cockroach survival skills that they need to get there.
Right. So it's impossible. Yeah. I mean, this is what we came away with, I think, I don't know, a few weeks ago talking about this, was that the reason we hated the ending of Game of Thrones so much is because we didn't think any of these people were right for the throne, because the idea of monarchy is not good, because a good person can't be king, because you have to be the type of person that these people are to become the king. It's never going to be good.
I think it's more bleak than that. It's more than monarchy. If you go back to Frank Herbert and Dune, if you go back to the Matador flag we're waving at Frank Herbert here with the wheels within wheels within wheels compared to feints within feints within feints.
Yeah.
The whole point of Dune is there are no heroes and there are no good political leaders.
Well, yeah.
I think the point, at least in this chapter, is that the idea of a good and admirable leader is similarly fantastical and impossible in a real grounded world like this.
Yes, I'm with you there. Yeah. That's my my unfortunate political opinion, is that if you got far enough to be a big politician, then I don't trust you.
This is why I put all my eggs in the Jon Snow basket, because he doesn't want to lead.
Yeah, exactly. But he can't get to a position of leadership without wanting to lead, unless someone just puts him there magically, but that's not going to happen.
We got 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. The way that Timothée Chalamet walks up those stairs at the end of Dune 2, Jon Snow never did that, okay?
Right.
That's why I want him to be president.
That's true, yeah. But, then at the end of the show, Game of Thrones, they try to just put Bran the neutral up on the throne, and it just doesn't make any goddamn sense, because he's going to be surrounded by all of these vipers, and he's not going to be able to play this game, and so it's not going to go well. It's never going to work. The system is never going to work.
He also might be a dead zombie vessel.
Well, we
talked about that earlier. But yeah, I think that's my takeaway. And we're emotionally and interpersonally, I think there's a lot that's really depressing and miserable in a fun way in this chapter.
Right.
I think the apathy and impossibility and misery of the philosophy underlying all of it, especially, I mean, this is basically political philosophy, this chapter, that really gets me excited. So I got a lot out of this chapter, and I'm really rooting for Ned. I think if things had gone another way, he could have gotten pretty good at this.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But at what cost, to your point? Like, what might he have become? But even still, I mean, Hand of the King, and Robert's still king, and he's got to, I mean, what are they going to do? Kill all the Lannisters and everything's going to be fine?
If I had a smarter, savvier king, I would want a Ned Stark on his small council. That's what I mean.
Sure. Yeah. I just think he would have had to sacrifice a few things to continue to be good at this game, and he'd have to backstab a few people and that sort of thing. So, but the problem is we know Ned's not going to do that, and we know he won't accept this idea that in order to have power and influence here, you have to play this game a little bit. we know he's not going to do that, and that's a big part of why it's not going to work out. So that's sad to see. But yeah, I am curious to continue to follow his efforts.
This was maybe the first chapter that felt how I wanted reading this book and talking about it to feel.
Cool.
Because I think there's real, I mean, again, we talked about this in the Fire and Blood episodes over on Patreon, because those move so quicker through this complicated history, and we get to talk about it like we're talking about the news and flipping through a newspaper, because there are so many huge events popping off all the time. I feel like this chapter had that feeling.
Yeah.
Where we can talk about it and debate it like we're talking about real stuff in our lives. That's how talking about the Game of Thrones show always felt. And I think we're established enough in these characters and deep enough into this story that we're really getting there with a lot of moving parts, with a lot of personalities and philosophies. So I was very encouraged by this chapter.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to keep going. Our next chapter next week is going to be Tyrion. I'm excited to go back to Tyrion, especially because he's just been imprisoned by Catelyn. So that's going to be fun to watch.
He's the best version of everything I just described.
Exactly.
If you want even more George R. R. Martin discussion from us, we are doing House of the Dragon episodes every Tuesday after they air on Sunday on HBO. And every Sunday, we just wrapped it up, basically. We did all of the chapters of Fire and Blood that House of the Dragon is dramatizing and adapting. We went through the source material for 8 volumes. It's like 10 hours of some of our, I said this before, but I believe it, some of our best analytical work ever. We're continuing it now by doing the rest of the book after that adaptation ends, and then we're going to do the beginning of the book after that, just to kind of cover all our bases.
Just read the whole thing, yeah.
But if you want something a little different, over on Patreon, we also just did a break from George R. R. Martin and talked about the 3 Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies.
Yes.
So if you want something different, there's a little breakfast buffet over there where we talk about 3 movies at length, and it's really just praising Willem Dafoe for an hour. But
it's true.
if you want a little variety in your fantasy soup, there's some Willem Dafoe in it.
Awesome. Yes. Well, let us know what you thought of this chapter, the stuff we discussed. If you have different opinions, we would love to hear them. If you're on YouTube, you can comment below. If not, if you're just listening, you can send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com, or DM us on Instagram at secondbreakfastpod. Or, of course, if you're on Patreon, you can just comment on the Patreon post for this episode. It's easy to do that there as well. Everything else is in the description. And thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.